priority list, but open for questions after. My name is Janine Carpenter. I'm the Director of Research and Policy here at the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga, and this is my favorite meeting of the year because this is the meeting where we finally get to talk about our legislative priorities, some of which we've already been working on this year, and really outline what we're trying to see happen in the Tennessee legislature this year. Certainly our priorities don't cover all the important issues, but these are some bills that we've decided internally to prioritize. So we'll go over them in different categories. We have proactive legislation, so that's legislation that we write in-house. We have maintaining past gains legislation, which is legislation that relates to bills that we have previously passed or worked on. Then we'll talk about a number of our partners' priority bills that we also advocate and work on with them. And then just a couple more bills that we really love and that I just can't bear the thought of not including on a priority list. So the order that we'll do this in is starting with our proactive bills, maintaining past gains, partners, and then the additional ones. And when we stop recording and open the floor for questions, feel free to ask about all of these bills as well as some others if you have questions about them. So we have two bills that we wrote in-house that we are working on passing this session. The first relates to human trafficking education. Last year, the legislature passed a bill requiring that teachers be educated every 3 years on human trafficking. And that's a great bill. We supported it, but it only included teachers. So what we're doing this year is rounding that out to include all public school personnel. What we know is that the people who see students leaving and returning to campus, the people who may see curious behaviors from students, the people who may have a relationship with students aren't always classroom teachers. It could be front office staff, it could be janitorial staff, it could be their coaches, it could be their bus driver. And so with this bill, all public school personnel are required to receive the same training that teachers are required to receive. The really great news is we were able to get this bill moving very quickly, and we've already passed the Senate as of Monday, which is great. And the House bill will be going on notice next week, which means for all of you who get our advocacy action alerts, I'll be asking you to make some calls on this bill next week. Our other piece of proactive legislation really simply changes the definition of domestic abuse to include economic abuse. Economic abuse is really any instance where someone is controlling or manipulating another by controlling, taking, monitoring their finances, limiting their access to go to work or to school, limiting their access to get to job training, any of those things. This bill was talked about in the Senate Judiciary Committee a week and a half ago, and it will be back in Senate Judiciary this week. We are working on amending the language of the bill just slightly to address two issues. First, to make sure that there is abusive intent behind the actions, the economic actions that the abuser is taken. And second, to make sure the language is such that the bill can't be misused against a victim instead of against an abuser. And I think it'll be a minor change, but it'll be back in Senate Judiciary where we have a really supportive committee on Tuesday this week. So those are the two pieces of proactive legislation that we are working on, that we wrote in-house and found sponsors for and are moving. Both of those bills, Senate bills, are sponsored by Senator Gardenhire from here in Chattanooga. The House sponsor for the human trafficking bill is Michelle Carringer out of Knoxville. And the House sponsor for the economic abuse is Rebecca Alexander out of Jonesboro. So those are our proactive bills. The next section of bills are bills that we are advocating for or against in order to maintain past gains or to maintain the progress that we have made previously in our legislative advocacy work. The first of these is a bill that we are opposing. We were also opposing it last year, and we were also opposing it the previous session. In 2018, we worked with the late Representative Mike Carter to effectively end child marriage in Tennessee. And in order to do that, we have a bill that prohibits anyone under the age of 17 from getting married. 17-year-olds can't marry anyone older than 21. And in order to do that, they need parental permission and an interview with a judge. And we have some of the strictest penalties for anyone found trying to force or coerce marriage in our state. There's a bill that we've been working against now that I guess is going to perpetually appear for us to work against, that would essentially eliminate all restrictions on who can be married, and remove marriage from a civil process to making it a strictly religious one. Obviously, we are opposed to this bill because it will roll back all of the controls we have in place to stop forced marriage, coerced marriage, trafficking as marriage, and child marriage. So we will continue to fight against that should it ever go to committee. And then there are two bills related to the expunction process for survivors of trafficking. In short, we led on the legislation, the first piece of legislation in Tennessee that would allow survivors of human trafficking to have their records expunged after they had entered one of the single point of entry service centers for survivors of trafficking across the state of Tennessee. Otherwise, there are really strict rules on how many offenses you can have expunged, and the process to do it is very complicated. We passed a bill where it was a single form to be filed in the last place where there was a criminal conviction, and that would then be used to retroactively clear their records of violent offenses. There are two bills this session related to that. The first is Senate Bill 2303, which we are absolutely supporting. One of the concessions we had to make when we passed our bill was that there had to be at least one conviction for prostitution in order for the survivor to qualify to have their record expunged. But we know that not all trafficking is sex trafficking. We also know that all people who are trafficked for sex aren't necessarily ever convicted of prostitution. And so this bill, which I'm very excited about and very hopeful about, would remove the requirement that one of the convictions be for prostitution. So that would actually strengthen our previous legislation back to how we originally intended it. The other bill related to expunction for survivors of trafficking was filed as a caption bill. A caption bill is basically a place-saving bill. So a bill will be filed so that they can make it by the deadline, but the intent is always to amend it to say something else. Caption bills can either be really benign or really scary. And so this bill was filed under the auspice of just extending the deadline that a district attorney can respond to a request for expunction from a survivor of trafficking from 60 to 65 days. But we know it's a caption bill, and we know it's sitting on the House desk awaiting amendment. And so we are following it closely just to make sure that there isn't something else going on with it to protect that piece of legislation that we had passed. And the final maintaining past gains bill that we are supporting this session is really all about human trafficking, education, and awareness, much like what we are doing with public school employees in our proactive bill. This bill is requiring the Department of Corrections, the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, and the Department of Human Services to require all of their appropriate personnel, so anyone on the front lines in any of those organizations or any of those departments, to require annual training in recognizing the signs and how to intervene in cases of trafficking, which obviously is working right alongside with what we're working on, and is such an important tool in stopping trafficking across Tennessee. So those are our 4 maintaining past gains bills. There are some others that we didn't put on the priority list because we're confident that they're going to pass and we're not going to need to advocate for them. The next section of our bills is really the big one. And those are our partner priorities. And I just mean big in terms of numbers. We work strategically with a number of organizations across the state of Tennessee and even nationally, and to support their work, and they support us in return. And there are so many great organizations doing great work. So on these partner priorities, I've listed the bills, but I've also listed the organization leading on the bills so that you can find out more, or you know who some of the other organizations doing good work in our state are. With respect to most of these priorities, we have worked on them in the past, and we are continuing to work on them. So we have partnered with A Better Balance over the years on a number of issues, and they are really the state leaders when it comes to work related to paid leave. And they have 3 bills that they are working on this year. One is a bill to provide Tennessee state employees, so public employees, paid leave for 12 weeks. We have no paid leave legislation in Tennessee. Another of their bills is the Tennessee Family Insurance Act, which I love. It's amazing. It's basically a buy-in paid leave opportunity for families, whereby you pay an amount each month into this family insurance so that when you need paid leave, you can access it. And there's no cost to the business. But then they have a bill that just spoke to my heart this year that we are putting as our priority bill with them. And what it's doing is it's eliminating local paid leave preemptions. And so a preemption is when the state government tells your local government that they can't do something. They take the power away. And this bill basically removes a prohibition or a preemption that previously said that local governments, so cities or counties, can't say that they'll only do work with companies with family-friendly policies. So in this case, if this worked, it would mean that the city government in Chattanooga, Tim Kelly could say, we are only going to contract with companies that offer their employees paid leave. Or Mayor Coppinger could say, we are only going to partner with companies who offer paid leave, as a way to encourage businesses to offer what is absolutely essential and critical for families. Presently, the state does not allow local governments to make those decisions, and we just really believe that they should. The next bill on this list is one that we are opposing on behalf of the Children's Advocacy Center of Hamilton County. Many of you who have been allies of the Women's Fund and who have been advocates on behalf of the Women's Fund priority list will remember making calls last week about the Children's Advocacy Center opposition to a bill that said anonymous reporting of child abuse will not be accepted anymore, right? So for someone to file a complaint or to report an instance of child abuse, they can't do it anonymously. And we opposed that bill and stopped it last session. So this bill, a very similar, but almost scarier bill, has been introduced that says, okay, you can accept anonymous reports, but you can't do anything about it. So if you receive anonymous reports of child abuse, you cannot enter the home or the facility to investigate or look to confirm that that abuse is taking place unless you have other evidence. You know, anonymity in reporting is incredibly important. Often the people who report abuse are also at risk, are in a position where they are also in danger. And so to not be able to do so anonymously increases their risk. It may threaten their job security if it's at a child care center. There are myriad reasons why protecting the anonymity of reporters is critical, because we do not want people to be scared to report child abuse. So we'll be fighting that bill again this session. Another partner organization that we have worked with in the past is Awake, Advocates for Women and Kids Equality. And we have been working on a bill and helping them advocate for an advocate confidentiality bill for the last few years. You'll note that there's only a House number here because it's already passed the Senate. But what this bill really does is it says if a victim goes into a sexual assault center or a domestic violence center or any kind of center, right, where they can then speak to a trained advocate about what happened to them, that advocate with whom they have spoken has to keep what they say confidential, right? We have to make sure that victims feel comfortable going in and seeking care and talking to folks to get the care that they need without fearing that the advocates that they speak to will then go and talk to other people. And so this bill has already passed the Senate, and we will continue to advocate alongside Awake to make sure that it passes this session in the House as well. Healthy and Free Tennessee is another organization that we have partnered with and whose bills we try to lift up as often as we can. They have more priority bills than these two, but we do have these two on our priority list. The first is an anti-shackling piece of legislation saying that pregnant incarcerated persons shouldn't be shackled. I don't really know what else to say about that, except for clearly pregnant individuals should not be shackled. And so we have had this on our priority list. Every year that they've been working on it, we'll continue to work alongside them to see this passed. This is also a priority of the Chattanooga Mayor's Council for Women Justice Group, something that they have worked on. This is an issue that we really care deeply about. Healthy and Free does a great job leading on it, and we want to support them on that. Last session, some of you will remember that Healthy and Free led on the resolution that basically lifted up doulas as a critical component of community health care. And this session, they have a bill to require that TennCare recipients have access to doulas as part of their insurance coverage when they are pregnant. And so we are also lifting up that bill, sort of, it just continues so seamlessly the work that they were doing on behalf of doulas last session. And we want to make sure we continue to advocate for that as well. I have this listed as women's funds because I have this really unique opportunity with the Women's Funding Network, which is the umbrella organization that unites women's funds really across the country and from around the world. And they also have a really neat advocacy and public policy peer community. And one of the bills that we have had the opportunity in that peer community to really dive into and talk about and work on is the Crown Act. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Crown Act, it is an acronym that stands, for Create a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair, right? It is designed to end discrimination against natural hair and hairstyles. Which is something that has gained increasing attention over the years, but it still needs to be included as a form of discrimination so that it cannot be acted upon. This bill has already passed the Senate, and it's working its way through the House committees right now. in Tennessee with some amendments that we'll have to follow really closely. But clearly, we support this. We want to make sure that businesses, public schools, folks cannot discriminate against natural hair or hairstyling choices that folks make. And this is, I think, the only bill on our partner priorities that we've never had the opportunity to talk about on one of our calls. And this bill is being led by the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. And they're actually leading on a slate of 4 bills, all of which are related to a case where a woman and her mother ended up being murdered. And in this instance, what it does is it's trying to create a mechanism whereby if someone were to violate an order of protection, or be taken into custody and then subsequently released from custody, that the person to whom the order was originally granted is notified of that, right? So we have a system where victims are notified of certain things, but we need to make sure that whenever anything happens with anyone who has an order of protection out against them, that the person who's taken that order is notified of it so that they know there's a possibility that they could be at risk. That wasn't done in this particular case and ended in really fatal and disastrous circumstance. So those are our partner priority bills. It's quite a long list, but we have the good fortune to work with a number of amazing partners. And so what I'm going to do now is just move on to talk about 3 more bills really quickly that are additional priorities. And then I'll stop recording and open up the floor for questions and contributions. I think we might have some folks from some of those partner organizations if they want to chime in as well. So our additional priorities are bills that we just can't stop ourselves from cheering for. They are bills that we love. In this case, 2 of them are bills that we have worked on before. The first, Senate Bill 1816, we previously partnered with Awake, one of our partner organizations, on a bill to require an affidavit to be filled out by people convicted of domestic violence, where they have to fill out the form and commit to surrendering their firearms following their conviction. This bill goes even one step further, and it says that the third party to whom those people surrender their firearms have to then submit an affidavit saying, yes, I've received the firearms, I take responsibility, I understand that this person is not allowed to have them. Many of you who have been involved with the Women's Fund for any length of time know that firearms surrender processes in Tennessee are egregious. And it's an issue that we've lifted up. We've had postcard campaigns about, we've talked about at our Voices luncheons. We will always support bills to strengthen that process. So this is an issue that I suspect many of you are familiar with. The next bill is a political participation bill. It appears to have been filed twice, but I listed all the numbers because when I was working on this PowerPoint, they had not yet condensed them. This bill is one that we worked on, I want to say 2 years ago, it might have been 3, to get it out of its first committee. Again, we worked really closely with the late Representative Mike Carter on this. This bill authorizes the use of campaign funds for childcare expenses related to the campaign. We know that it's really difficult for caregivers and parents to become involved as policymakers, to run for public office, to have their voices heard, because they have the additional consideration of, how am I going to make sure my child is well cared for? This bill simply authorizes the use of campaign funds for childcare expenses when that individual is out campaigning. And it has some restrictions about who it can pay, but we want representation from diverse folks in public office. And that's not going to happen when parents and caregivers are excluded because of the additional expense that they incur just to be out in the community and campaign while also caring for their child. And finally, I don't understand why this needs to be legislated, but apparently it does, because not everyone has access to mammograms and subsequent testing that's required if there's an irregular mammogram test, and this bill would require it. Let's fight breast cancer by making sure preventative care isn't cost prohibitive to people. We know that's the most important thing that people can do to prevent a horrible breast cancer diagnosis. And so is regular screening and catching it early. And let's make sure that folks can afford to do that. What's not on our priority list are some additional really awful bills that if they start to move, we will include them in our calls to action, asking for you to make calls and oppose them. There are just a lot of those, kind of too many to outline as our priority list actions. And also I like to be hopeful that folks will not move these through committee and we won't have to be defensive against them. But should that happen, you can expect to see them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording and open the floor for questions and conversation.